With California's Great America closing, I don't think many people realize what an amazing park it used to be and how many incredible memories I have there. I've actually been going to California's Great America since it opened back in 1976 as Marriott's Great America. It was one of two parks, the other one just outside of Chicago, that were sister parks. They weren't quite identical, but they were close to it. Over the years, I think it's been lost what an amazing park it used to be. What an incredible theme park, and how many memories I have. With it closing, I know I already did a video that talks about the fact that it's closing and some of the issues there, but I just, so many memories of this park. It really was the very first theme park I ever went to. It was the first time I ever saw theming at a park outside of the fair, which really wasn't themed. It was the first place that had rides I'd been to outside of a carnival or the local fair. It was just such an amazing place. Every area in the park at the time was fully themed. The Yukon Territory, New Orleans Square, the county fair, and every place filled that theme. The costumes they wore, and for me, it was so cool as a kid. They had amazing shows. There was one show that they did, one of the musical shows, called The Evolution of Rock, which I still remember a couple of the songs from it. It was just so well done. I remember the Bugs Bunny show. Bugs always had a costume that fit the park. So much more than what you see at Six Flags now using the Looney Tunes characters. The characters fit the park. Really, Marriott's was the first theme park to use the Looney Tune characters, and Six Flags along the way picked up the license. But some of the rides, one of the hallmark rides, the landmark rides there, when it opened, and for many years, was the triple-armed Ferris wheel. A Ferris wheel doesn't really do it justice. It was a machine that had three arms, one which would be on the ground, loading and unloading, and then it would have two other branches that would be up in the air. You had this weird-looking three-armed apparatus with two arms up in the air, and then you had these giant cages, and they would be rotating around nice and slow and easy. And it was probably a 15-minute ride, something like that. It would take a while for you to get up, and then the arm rotating, and it gave you a great view of the park. It was a great way to get a break, and it was iconic. I remember when they made the decision to take it out and was just crushed because this ride was really in many ways a symbol of the park, and now it was going to be gone. They ended up putting in Vertigo, which I love. Vertigos, it was a fun ride, but it was not the same thing. And to see still the same concrete pad and go, oh, I know what used to be here. Willard's Wizard was iconic. I love the fact that it's still at Six Flags Great America. That was my first big coaster. And I remember as a kid being scared of this thing. And I remember being scared at the time of just the turns. Spiral Lift was really cool. But those turns for a 7-year-old, that was frightening. That was new. That was, what do you do with this? But gradually I got over that. The log flumes. You had the Yankee Clipper and Loggers Run. You had the lower level with the flumes, but instead of just having a little lift hill and then a roundabout that would then drop, these things were high, especially for a kid. I want to say they were probably like 50 feet, something like that. But for a kid, they were huge. And both of them had parts that interacted on the ground where you kind of raced with each other. And then when you went up your lift hill to the upper part, they actually both had split drops. So you would alternate which side you would drop. And then they intertwined. So when you would drop, you would actually be coming towards the other ride. And sometimes if you got good timing, you could actually kind of duel as you dropped. It was really, really neat. Again, frightening a little bit for a kid. I can remember one time going with my newly married cousin. She just married into the family. This was her time to, get to know us and everything. And I ended up sitting in front of her. And as we went down the hill, she ducked and actually bit me in the shoulder. I still hold that against her. Linda. But it was just a funny moment. We had some amazing moments. We would go during the week when the park was empty. And I remember the year they opened up the Tidal Wave. The Tidal Wave is a Schwarzkopf shuttle loop that would launch you out of the station, through a loop, up a spike, back again, through the loop backwards, through the station, back up a spike, and then into the station. Stop. We'd go on days that it was empty. And so my dad, all four of us, we would ride this thing over and over. We'd get off, run around, hop back on again. Get off, run around, to the point where we actually had this stupid little chant that we would do that the ride operators thought was hilarious. And if you ever go to a park with me and we start marathoning something, you'll hear me do this still. It's, do it again, we're crazy, do it again. And all three of us would be doing this. We did it too with Orland's Orbit. It looked kind of like a Ferris wheel that would raise up out of the ground, and then the cars would be on the outside and you'd actually go upside down. We'd ride that thing 3, 4, 5 times in a row and come off punchy just because of the G-forces affecting the blood pressure. Like, oh yeah. I was on a junior high school trip to Marriott's. And so we're at this trip, and I was actually there hanging around with a friend who didn't really like roller coasters. And I talked him onto the Tidal Wave. So we get on this ride, and he's scared, and he's one of those, okay, guys, if you're scared of coasters, don't do this. But he closes his eyes. It's so much worse when your eyes are closed because you can't see what's happening as you're tossed everywhere. But he closes his eyes, we launch, we hit the loop, we go up in the air, and as we're paused there, I look over to him and went, Dave, open your eyes up. And he opens his eyes, and all he sees is clear blue sky. And then we start to drop back down again. And what he said was not something I could repeat. It included, I hate you. But it was, oh gosh, it was fun. I can remember when they put the edge in and how scary that was at the time, because drop towers were a totally new concept. The edge was what's called a first generation intimate free fall. And so you would go up the tower, it'd push you out, and then you would drop, and then you'd slide. So I remember when they opened that and going on it the first year, and that first year they were telling everybody, hey, you got to do the penny shuffle. And the ride operators actually kept rolls of pennies, and they would give everybody a penny if they wanted to do this. And you put the penny on your knee, once you pushed you out, you put the penny on your knee then, and you could watch the penny float, and you try to catch it. We did that on Superman The Escape 2 when it opened. They quit doing that after a little while because they realized every now and then these pennies would bounce and hit people. But it was a really cool thing the first year. When the IMAX opened, that was amazing. The IMAX theater at Marriott's was actually one of the very first IMAXs to open in the entire country. I think there had only been like 1 or 2 others before. And I remember, I believe the movie was If I Could Fly. It was a hot air balloon ride. And going in and sitting in this huge theater, and now we're used to IMAXs, it's no big deal. But at the time, it was totally amazing. And just sitting in front of this giant screen, and it was just new technology, you're not used to it, and all of a sudden, you feel like you're in the movie. It was like, whoa. And, now we see every town has 1 or 2 IMAXs, and you go see your regular movies on it. But that was amazing at the time. Totally new, totally foreign. They would typically have 2 or 3 different movies playing at the IMAX. We always went and saw at least one of them. Not just for the break, but because it was so cool. Now you pay $10 at your local theater. And I can still remember the Demon when it opened. When the park opened, they had a roller coaster called Turn of the Century. I think Turn of the Century actually opened in 1977. It was not one of the first coasters to go upside down, but what it had was a lift hill. You would drop down, it had a couple camelbacks, and then a couple turns, and you had a corkscrew element, which was really kind of the very first looping thing that a coaster company did. The one exception was some of the Schwarzkopf coasters like Revolution and Magic Mountain that had the straight vertical loop. Nobody had both. I didn't ride Turn of the Century. I was too scared. It went upside down. That was a no-no. But I can remember when they converted Turn of the Century 2-3 years later into the Demon. What they did was they took those 2 camel humps and they turned them into vertical loops. They painted the colors. They added all this theming. They added a soundtrack, which was scary. They added all these effects. So now all of a sudden you had a tunnel that would light up with red lights and mist makers and all of this stuff. And it was scary. It was the very first really themed roller coaster with effects and everything else. Honestly, it might have even predated Big Thunder or around the same time. But I can remember being in line with my parents and listening to the soundtrack and watching people in front of me in line get terrified and scared of the ride because of the soundtrack and bailing out and leaving. It was that new, that intense. Now it's very nostalgic, and you can look back if you go to the one at Six Flags Great America. They try to have the effects working and some of that, so you can experience it a little bit. But even the ride operators, they were dressed in red and black, and they had these red and black capes on, which looked really cool, honestly. My first experience with theming on a ride, and it blew me away. And then once I finally got the courage up to start riding big coasters and loop coasters, oh yeah, amazing. Riding that in junior high school and high school, that was the cool ride at the park. Even when they added in the Grizzly. One of the jokes in coaster circles has been that the Grizzly is one of the worst coasters ever. In fact, they actually had a whole campaign for a couple years in some of the coaster polls to make it the worst coaster. The Grizzly was bad from the beginning. It was never a good coaster. It was slow and not thrilling, and the Grizzly was one that it became a joke, and you'd have to ride the Grizzly because of how bad it was. I can't believe that roller coaster lasted as many years as it did without them just scrapping it and giving up and doing something else. I can remember though when Marriott's gave up and the city took over ownership, and you went from all this theming to all of a sudden everybody was wearing gray shirts and maintenance color outfits. The costumes all went away almost immediately. You could see the lack of care. The city only ran the park for 2 years. It was 2 years that immediately you could just kind of sense the downhill slide. The show quality wasn't as good. And then Paramount bought the parks, and there was a lot of hope that, okay, maybe we'll see the park come up. And Paramount did improve a lot of things. The costumes the employee outfits got a little better. They didn't look like maintenance outfits, at least, but they still weren't themed. And you could gradually see the idea of the themed areas kind of starting to go away and be ignored. And then they brought in Star Trek. I'm a huge Trek fan. I love Trek. But when you see Ferengi and Vulcans walking around in Yukon territory, it doesn't fit. You got this old logging camp with a Ferengi chasing people around and making them scream because they were ugly. That was hysterically funny. But they didn't fit. And you would see things like that the idea of the themed areas just didn't apply anymore. And you could just kind of gradually see the slide from theme park to amusement park. Paramount did a much better job of improving stuff, but then you've got Top Gun, which was put in the middle of New Orleans Square. What does Top Gun have to do with New Orleans? Nothing. It's a great roller coaster. It's an amazing roller coaster. I love the ride, but it had nothing to do with the theming. Vortex was stuck right in the middle of the park. It had no theming at all. None. And you could just kind of see the whole idea of, hey, let's preserve the theming and the atmosphere, music and everything, just kind of gradually go out the window. And then when Cedar Fair bought the park, it wasn't the same. It's been a few years since I visited, but the last time I visited with my family, it really was a hodgepodge. You could see remnants of the old theming. Some of the buildings were still there, but you could tell it had been completely ignored. Paramount really started the idea of forgetting the theming. Cedar Fair didn't care diddly squat about it. And over the last several years, everything I've heard from people is that the quality of the park has been downhill. And I can't say I'm surprised by the announcement that Cedar Fair is going to get rid of the park and close it up. That they sold the property. I'm actually kind of surprised that it wasn't the San Francisco 49ers that bought the property, since they could use it for parking lot. Honestly, I wouldn't be terribly surprised if this software company that's buying it, ends up turning a lot of it into that. It's frustrating because what I think we're seeing now is the result of a company that runs amusement parks and theme parks, but really doesn't care much about most of the parks that it runs. It has its priorities. Honestly, I was shocked as all get out when I heard that Worlds of Fun is getting a brand new coaster, a decent coaster. It was like, oh, they're investing in the park. Oh my goodness. But I think that there's probably going to be at least a couple other parks that they're going to do the same thing to. Beware Valley Fair and Michigan's Adventure. Cedar Fair seems to have its priorities, and Cedar Point and Knott's Berry Farm. And I love the fact that they've tried to preserve the theming at Knott's Berry Farm. I think that is a result of local management and people there versus the company. I think the writing has been on the wall for Great America for several years, and it's heartbreaking. I do hope right now the property is zoned as it has to be a theme park or amusement park, and I kind of hope that they don't change it. I hope the city basically says, no, this is what it's zoned for, this is what it's going to be, which will flip the deal. But I wouldn't mind seeing somebody else come in and operate it. Somebody who cares. Somebody who wants to invest in the park again. And maybe bring it back to what it used to be. Which was an amazing themed park that created fantastic memories where stuff worked together. And where I spent my childhood growing up. Do you have a place that you grew up with? Do you have memories of California's Great America? I'd love to hear them as well. Please share them in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share the video. We're on our way to 30,000 subscribers. Let's hit it because I got all sorts of giveaways and stuff coming, so help me get there. Thank you so much to my patrons for their support. Their financial support helps me do so much, and while I'm in this period of transition, their support is helping put all sorts of things in place you'll get to see soon. I promise, really. If you want to know more about that, as well as the perks that come with it, be sure to check the description below. There's a ton of info there. Thank you so incredibly much for watching. God bless. I just started, and you gotta start again. Leave our super much down. Going to kill my dog. Thank you. With California's Great America closing,